The first deaf person that parents often meet is their own child. It's a low incidence disability to be deaf or hard of hearing. It doesn't happen that often. And so parents have this beautiful baby and they go, my kid can't hear. And then their world falls apart. Part of my Ferrandi pageant is competition. We had to do a lot of paperwork. We did an essay. We had to write a cover letter. My cover letter said exactly this. I used the matrix reference. So, red pill, blue pill, which would you take? I said, if one of these pills made me hearing and one of these kept me deaf, I would take the pill that kept me deaf. I don't want to hear it because it's not who I am. And I am so unapologetically deaf. And I can't imagine who I would even be if I wasn't deaf. Like, the world is not built for people like me, but I'm going to figure out a way to navigate that and build it to suit me and so that others can follow behind and have access. So I would not take the pill that makes me hearing. No, thank you.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. The purpose of this podcast is to tell the stories of Alaskans of interest and importance. Today, our guest is Clara Baldwin. Clara is the Assistant Special Education Director for the Anchorage School District, and she oversees the Alaska State School for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. She was born in Northern California, but moved to Anchorage 14 years ago. She has been a lifelong advocate for the rights of the deaf and hard of hearing community and has found her place leading that struggle here in Alaska. Clara is the 2026 Fur Rendezvous Queen. She is the first deaf Fur Rendezvous Queen in Fur Rendezvous' history. Leah McElwee is the American Sign Language interpreter for me during today's interview. Brenna Kelly is the American Sign Language interpreter for Clara Baldwin during today's interview, and it is Brenna's voice that you hear in this recording. Clara Baldwin, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
So tell us a little bit about your early life.
Sure. I was born and raised in the Bay Area, California, specifically Oakland. Very proud to be from there. I was born to a fifth-generation deaf family. So my parents are deaf, my grandparents are deaf. Everyone in my family, going back 5 generations, is deaf. And that's not typical. I can expand on that later, but it's a very rare situation and a lucky situation. So I went to the California School for the Deaf, Fremont. It's a residential school. And I went there my whole education. I went to Gallaudet University as well, and it's the only liberal arts school or university for deaf and hard of hearing folks in the world. So I got to go to that specialized university, graduated, and then I went to the University of Arizona and came to Alaska. And I've lived in Alaska for the last 14 years, and I love this state so very much.
I assume if you're the 5th generation, is the type of deafness that you have, it's genetic? Is it okay to ask that?
Yes, and yes. So it's an appropriate question, absolutely. And it's actually a really good question. So I have CONN. I have the connection 26 gene. So it's a mutation in the gene that causes genetic hearing loss. And I'm not deaf because of a sickness or an illness or a fever or anything. I am deaf by my genes. So my dad gave me the gene. My mom actually has a different kind of deafness. She had German measles as a young child, and so she has an acquired hearing loss. She's the only deaf person in her family. She grew up in Canada. My dad grew up in California, and that's sort of where the deaf gene comes from. My grandparents are deaf, great-grandparents are deaf, great-great-grandparents are deaf, etc.
How old were you when you realized that being deaf made you different?
Good question. Not until very much later in my life. I think the first year that I lived in Anchorage, that's when I felt like an outsider. I felt different because I grew up in a very deaf-centered community. The Bay Area has such a strong, robust deaf community. There's services. There's so many deaf adults who serve as language models and role models. And there's so many different community events to go to and choices to make. And going to the school for the deaf, imagine whether you're deaf or not, you need to share a language with your teacher. So deaf people, well, we call you guys hearing people. And we would also say those regular people. Our teachers, whether they're deaf or hearing or just regular people, they're fluent in sign language. So I didn't feel different. And even in Gallaudet, I didn't feel different. It was sort of like a utopia, like a little deaf bubble. And I was safe and secure and shared a language with everybody. The only time maybe I experienced some struggle would be like asking for interpreters for my doctor's appointments when I was 14 or 15. But that was really the only struggle that I had. Going to Gallaudet University in that utopia bubble situation was like a bigger bubble, but I was sort of still with my people. And Gallaudet is a bilingual school. Everyone signs, everyone knows written and spoken English sometimes. And moving to Anchorage was like tough. People were rude. I faced discrimination. And it was tough at first. So it's just a very different experience and a different world to be in.
So I've only recently learned that written English is considered like a second language and that you're bilingual with your first language being American Sign Language. However, it made sense when I learned that because, and this is something I'm actually really embarrassed about. I'm going to confess something that I'm very embarrassed about. So when I was probably 22 or 23 years old, I was in a gay bar and a deaf man came up to talk to me and he was writing notes and the words were in the wrong order. And I didn't really understand what was happening. And I remember I wasn't rude, but I mean, I wasn't that interested. And so I kind of cut the conversation off, the note writing. But it's something that I kind of had the epiphany was like, oh, because it's a different language. He was speaking his second language with me in the notes. And I didn't really recognize that until just yesterday.
Oh, yeah. It's very common and understandable. ASL and English have very different grammatical structure and different syntax. American Sign Language, we have less sort of syntactual rules. We're a little more flexible. English, there's a lag right now when the interpreter is speaking because it's a totally different order and how we structure things is very different. So he was probably talking to you in American Sign Language order, but in English words. So that's really tough for him and tough for you to understand. So there's been a lot of research from a linguistics perspective on American Sign Language. We have better curriculums now. We have something called Bilingual Grammar Curriculum, BGC, and it's from Boston University. Boston University is one of the leading cutting-edge higher education institutions for bilingual instruction. So there's deaf ed teachers training programs there. They are the best of the best, in my opinion, and they've developed this curriculum. So the curriculum is a supplemental curriculum that we can use to teach the languages separately, but in a parallel way. So ASL and English do not share a grammatical structure, but I'll sort of give you an example to elaborate. So English, sometimes you have like a run-on sentence, let's say. And ASL has the same thing. So what we teach, the ASL part that we teach, is we would have to watch a reel or a movie, and everything is in academic formal sign language. So we have people watch this, and let's say, for example, the girl saw the baby crying, the girl went to get milk, gave it to the baby, and the girl realized that it was her birthday, and she baked her birthday cake, and you're signing and signing and signing. And then you get a worksheet with pictures of the whole reel, like not the English words. You get physical pictures of what's happening. And the students have used their pencils to draw where the sentence ends and begins. Like they are denoting grammatical structure in this. So they do that for a week, let's say. And then the second week of this training, they transition over to English. And they do it in written English. So it's the same thing, but in two different languages. So you can acquire both in a parallel way. And it has changed a lot of how we run our classrooms. Students' literacy proficiency scores have increased by 3% at least in just 1 year. And we haven't been using it for very long. So it seems small, but it's actually a huge gain for our program specifically. I saw a benefit to it. And I used this curriculum in our district because I think people thought that we were just this small little school and we had to keep up with what was going on at the higher level. Like, the Alaska Reads Act applied to us, and it shouldn't have because there was phonics in it. And it was sort of, we were this bothersome little school, and it was my job to be bothersome. So I said, look, can we purchase this, please? And we've seen some improvements. So the advocacy work was big, and it took us a long time to get this. Deaf people can learn very differently. So I feel for that deaf guy that you met, and you didn't know any better, but it happens. And now you have a wonderful husband and an adorable child. So it all worked out in the end. And you got to meet me and learn some stuff. So no worries on that.
So I want to bounce back to why you came to Alaska.
For love. I came for love. I met someone very young, and I just fell hard, as you do. And I moved here, and we didn't work out, unfortunately. I mean, maybe I'm actually okay with it. Maybe not, unfortunately. We didn't work out, and I fell in love with the state instead. that's why I stayed.
And you mentioned that you felt for the first time in your life as an outsider in Anchorage. Can you talk more about that?
Yes, I did. It was, I like to tell myself, like I moved here for love, but I also wanted to experience the real world. I don't want to say that like, my community that I grew up in was not good enough. Like I've said, it was a utopia and it's a safe place and it was a wonderful way to grow up. But like I said in my TED talk, I gave a TEDx talk in Anchorage 2024. And one of the most unique things about deaf folks is that we don't have like a motherland. We share a language, but we don't share a land. You can't fly to the deaf land like you can fly to Spain or fly to another country that speaks a different language. So very often in the deaf community, we go back to our just hometowns, our communities, and that's like our motherland. So I was in my motherland my entire life. And so I thought, what else is out there? It got me thinking and got me curious. And I had the itch to feel something different. And it's awful to say this maybe, but I wanted to experience what discrimination felt like. I felt like it was time because I had been supported and I had all the resources available to me that I needed. And I thought, other people who are like me suffer, and what does that feel like? And so many people, I think, would come up to me in Anchorage and stare, and they would kind of mock my hand gestures, and they would think that I don't need an interpreter. People would decide for me what my accommodations were. Like I would go into places and doctor's appointments would say, no, we can write back and forth. It's fine. I'm very confident that we can write back and forth. We don't need to hire an interpreter. And that is them asking me to accommodate them. They don't want to pay for interpreters, so I have to struggle with written English if maybe I wasn't very good at it, In the Bay Area, they're known for being progressive. Disability rights access is huge there. And here in Alaska, we are just simply behind. It's never too late to learn and be better, but I was frankly shocked at how behind we are and were. People were quite dismissive. Professionals were dismissive. And going into, I won't name the restaurant, and I still eat there and I support that business. They've learned, but I went up, I was so young, so naive, like 23 years old. And I asked, hey, would you hire a deaf person like me? And they said, nope, just straight up. So that they said, you couldn't communicate with us. So that was sort of one of the biggest first experiences in my 2 to 3 years there that I went, oh, this is very different.
What did you do your first few years for work?
So I was in the social work field for the first year. I worked for the Arc of Anchorage. I was a house parent for deaf and hard of hearing students who went to the Alaska State School for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. And the California School for the Deaf, it's a residential school. I had an option to live in the dorm or not. I didn't live in the dorm until later because I was close enough. And once I started to play sports and I was there after school, I transitioned to dorm life. But it wasn't mandatory. It was an option. And Alaska State School for the Deaf doesn't have a dorm. It's a day program. So the word residential school, I know, is a very controversial topic in the state. It comes with scars. And so we have to recognize that and understand that. So I had a different model. And the Arc of Anchorage at the time purchased a house for like more of a group home model. And they had licensed house parents work there. So it was any student from age 5 to 22, I think, could live in that house, separate, of course. But is it the best model? No, we have a better model now. But the house, I was the house mother for these kids, and I was 22 years old. And I don't think I would ever do it again. It was really great. It was a good experience. But after a couple of years of that, I became a teacher's assistant. We call them paraprofessionals now at Russian Jack Elementary. Bottom of the food chain, bottom of the barrel. Very different from where I am now, but that was my work for the first several years.
So I toured Russian Jack with you guys, the Russian Jack Elementary School. Was there a deaf program at that elementary school then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I guess go ahead and teach me a little bit about the history of the deaf program in Anchorage School District.
Oh, sure, can do. So going way back to 1972, maybe 73, people still fight about what year it was. Parents had severe grievances with how the district was supporting deaf and hard of hearing students in Anchorage. So it was a really good group, really strong group of parents came here to Juneau and signed the state charter agreement, I suppose, that they would support a deaf program. So how it was run was not necessarily established. The school district took it over, and it was sort of under the Anchorage School District. It was in their budget, in their management, and the money was sort of held by the district. So we had to follow the school board policies, procedures, their vision, etc., use their facilities. So far, the school has run with that model. There was a lot of teachers who were teaching, but they were not deaf themselves. And it's not necessarily wrong. The former teachers that we have are definitely qualified to teach those folks, but there was not really deaf staff. The deaf staff were relegated to like being paras or being assistants. So in that time, over 50 years, now the changes that we've seen, we have 60% of our teachers are deaf themselves, and the rest are not deaf. So in the last 2 years, our teacher retention rate is actually at 100%, which is unheard of. I've not seen that in a long time. And as a para, I experienced in the workplace, intentional or not, a lot of oppression. People were not invited as a deaf person to the table when it comes to making decisions for our program or our workplace. And I understand sometimes because there was not the level of degrees that we have and the level of professionalism that we have. So we didn't prioritize deaf voices. We didn't prioritize the deaf perspective. So I think as time has gone on, and by the time you got to tour our school, we have made such significant changes and gains. We've gained deaf staff, and now we are the majority rather than hearing folks. So I think it's really good for our students to see that deaf people can succeed, and we do succeed. And we have a huge spectrum of deaf students, like how deafness is a spectrum. How you are the deaf person could look like hearing aids and cochlear implants or not, speaking or not. There's ASL accents. I sign really quickly. I'm a Bay Area girl. It's our thing. People have told me, 14 years ago, they said, oh, you'll start signing slower now that you're in Alaska. And I don't think that has actually happened. But there's accents. There's different ways to be deaf. And deaf Alaskans are different than me. And it's just such a range of folks. So to have our students get to see that is huge and so very valuable to me to show consistency of diversity so that people who sign or not get to see what's out there and feel included and confident in whatever choice they make in their deafness journey so they can graduate out of our program successful adults.
I want to talk about the different choices that people can make, because when we toured, we saw different levels of deafness. We saw folks with the cochlear implants. We saw deaf-only classrooms. We saw integrated classrooms with deaf students with the hearing kids as well. Can you talk about all the different options and choices and why people make different decisions?
Certainly, yes. This is the beauty of an IEP. It is an individualized education plan. It is unique to the student. So every child has their own preferences, their own way of learning, and some parents want to pursue different avenues. So I want to be very clear when I say that Alaska, our state school for the deaf and hard of hearing, is a direct instruction classroom model, meaning that all of our deaf students are educated together in a classroom and directly in sign language. We don't teach phonics, for example. That phonetic way of reading, I personally never learned phonics because I don't hear phonics. I read and write pretty well. It's my second language. However, consistent exposure to words, finger spelling, it's like a high frequency word model. There's all sorts of different ways to teach deaf children to read without phonics and to teach them the structure of English and ASL and how they're separate. It's very successful for a lot of students. We don't offer that phonetic learning. So even if some of our students can, we just don't offer it necessarily as a consistent thing. We're mostly sign language, but with a bilingual approach in written and read English. There are other elementary schools that, serve children differently. Our program is Russian Jack, Clark, and East High School. And what we can do is we try to meet a least restrictive environment requirement for all students. And so this is what makes choices so important. Often there's a conversation between folks of how do we look at the parent choice and want compared to the IDEA law. And it can get really sticky because there's a lot that's open to interpretation. Feelings are involved. And we want to always empower parents to observe, like what you saw, Rep. Gray. How can we track their child's IEP progress with data, whatever they decide to do, whether they decide to do mainstreaming or come with us or both? We want to make sure that they're successful in whatever avenue that they choose. And our teachers are very, very diligent in tracking their progress through data. We're very data-driven. We want to make sure that if that child is behind or struggling, we're meeting about it, we are discussing it, and we're making that the IEP is a team effort in its essence. So through the menu of options, our program has become very unique And personally, I believe that it is the future of deaf ed because we have seen a lot of residential deaf schools start to close. They're shutting down because parents, maybe they're saying, oh, you only offer sign language. Do you work with your local school district to provide consultation services or interpreters? And the answer sometimes is no. So their numbers are shrinking. And there are state schools that have had to close down. They're expensive. For a smaller number of students to run a residential school, it's not cheap. It's worth it, but it's not cheap. And so governments are closing them. And it's so sad because that is a cultural mecca for us. Our residential schools, we actually do value them very much so. And it's like, when I go to a different state, I always want to go to their school for the deaf because it's like a little piece of our homeland. It's our culture. It's our language. So with those sites shutting down, I just look at AKSD and I go, we have to be unique. We are unique. It's labeled as the state school for the deaf, yes, but we are a program that serves all students with hearing loss, and we can cater to all students with hearing loss. We have to get creative sometimes. But I wonder, like, could we do the same thing? Would we be as nimble if we were a lower 48 deaf school? I don't think so.
Question about cochlear implants. And I don't know very much about them at all, but can you talk about how well they work and why some people who might be candidates for cochlear implants choose not to?
Great question. So cochlear implants, it's something that you have to have surgically implanted. It's a magnet that sits inside of a little hollowed out part of your skull. And cochlear implants, they are very specific to the person. You have to have a specific amount of hearing loss to qualify. And they say the earlier the better for cochlear implants. And personally, I don't have a cochlear implant, but I have seen some of our students with them, and they have become very successful using their CIs. We call them CIs, cochlear implants. So when every child who is implanted has to do something called mapping, like brain mapping, because there's a wire that goes into your brain. So you start practicing right away. It's not like glasses where they're an immediate fix. It's literally you have to train your brain to listen through these wires and through this magnet that attaches to the external processor. So the challenge that I see is if your cochlear implant comes off, you have no residual hearing left. So the surgery essentially destroys that nerve that carries sound in. So if you had any hearing, it's gone now. So it's difficult for some people. Like they want to wear their cochlear implant, but if anything happens to it, then they can't hear anything. So some people choose to get the surgery in their more deaf ear. Some choose not to. My family was, again, 5 generations of deaf people. Nobody needed a cochlear implant. We saw no need for it. We all talked to each other in sign language. So I didn't choose to get a cochlear implant. Some people later in life who do have a cochlear implant choose to explant that because they've had a very negative experience. There's a stigma in the deaf community that still exists. And like politics, there's one side or the other, and you can fall very much so one way or the other. So what we advocate for is ASL and cochlear implants together because then you are bilingual. A cochlear implant, CI, is not a fix or a cure. It's a great support to access your hearing environment, but it's not a panacea. It's not a magic bullet for everything. And some people get really exhausted listening all day. If you're born a deaf person, or even if you lose your hearing later in life and you're using your cochlear implant all day, if you want to rip those off at the end of the day and just choose to sign, if you have sign language skills, you can. And it is, again, like I said, a controversial topic, so it really depends on who you talk to. I'm speaking from an education perspective, and I am much more neutral on the subject than some other people are.
I want to talk about technology and the way it can help with access. Mm-hmm. You mentioned yesterday in conversation about Governor Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, having a sign language interpreter for all of her press that she does, but it's remote. And I guess I'm just thinking, like, in 2026, the options are more plentiful about the best way to provide accessibility to the deaf community. Can you just talk about the options and the options that work better than others? Unlike that doctor who said, just write notes back and forth.
Yes, absolutely. I think one of the best practices is to provide interpreters kind of no matter the cost when they are requested. Kathy Hochul, that has been requested of her, and she provides it. I will say that during the Biden administration, he did provide ASL interpreters at all of the press conferences at the White House. The press secretary had an interpreter with them all of the time. Now, during the new administration, it has been removed. So we've done a fairly good job to advocate for bringing that back, but I believe that was struck down and they are no longer providing it because they think that ASL interpreters will distract from the president's message. And that is a bummer because it's not a partisan issue. It is about access. It is a best practice to have an interpreter, and Kathy Hochul's model is beautiful. It is a universal way to, if you are deaf and you watch ASL, you can access it. But if you prefer captions, she also has captions. So you have both ways to access it. If you have cochlear implants in, you can hear. But if you know American Sign Language and you have cochlear implants, you are just getting everything all at once. So I think that it serves more people. It serves people in her community, in her locality, in her whole state. And I think that I want access to everything that my government is doing. And I think that they have a great model. So who you serve affects who votes for you. And providing interpreters is so key for deaf access. I've been to New York. I love concerts. I love going to Broadway. I went to Moulin Rouge when I was there, and I know all the songs by heart, of course, but they didn't have an interpreter available. So I said, well, what else can you offer? And they could offer headphones, which would increase the sound. And I said, that is just not going to work for me. It works for some people, but not for others. They also had a captioning device, and I thought, let's give that a try. It worked fairly well. The lines of dialogue became a little bit delayed, but the songs were still on point. And so I knew the sort of the context of the show. I wasn't totally lost, and I didn't mind because it was a last minute ask. But that's just something that I would like to think about here in the Capitol. I know we offer listening devices, and that benefits people who have gone deaf later in life. It doesn't benefit me at all. So I want to think more widely about how we can give deaf and hard of hearing people access to their government, how we can give them access to advocacy, because it's not a one-way street. We can't just listen to the government has to listen to us. And if we're experiencing discrimination, sometimes we get to the point where we're just silent on subjects and we become a little submissive and we just go, all right, I'll do whatever you tell me because I'm so tired of fighting. So me, it's not my personality to sit back and let these kinds of things happen. You have to do it strategically, but I will tell people, like, I'm not ready to lip read. I can't lip read. It doesn't work for me in every situation. I need to fight for my medical access rights. I need to see all my options. Lip reading is not full access to any message, even though some people are very good at it. And not all deaf people are like me. So this goes back to the work that I do with the Alaska Deaf Council. It's empowering individuals to be able to advocate for themselves, but we have to put those bridges and that roadmap in place for them to be able to petition our government.
You mentioned yesterday when you were watching the floor session in person that you got so much more information by having an interpreter there live interpreting the session, because at home, if you were watching gavel to gavel, you would be reading the captions, but you're not capturing any of the emotion and the way things are being said.
Exactly.
Specifically, and I'll just say it, specifically, Frank Tomaszewski was giving a closing speech about a nurse licensure compact amendment, and he was very, very angry. But you would not have gotten that if the interpreter hadn't been signing in an angry way.
Exactly. I think that the best analogy I could give you is 2D versus 3D. If you just think about art or movies or anything, if I was in Anchorage watching on Gavel to Gavel, it would look really boring because no one is very animated. They're behaving very appropriately in their body language on the Senate or House floor. And they're lucky I'm not there in person to watch it. But I watch it on TV sometimes and the captions it's two-dimensional. With the interpreter, it became three-dimensional. I very much respect his passion. He was disagreeing with what was going on, and his body was so calm. And his face was so calm. It's all about the tone of voice for him. So I actually was a little bit shocked. I checked in with the interpreter. I said, is he actually as mad as you are making him out to be? And she said, yes, of course. His voice is doing the emoting here. So it's a 2D versus 3D situation. And that's only part of what deaf people are missing out on. We're missing out on something called incidental exposure to information. So you, as a hearing person, will hear a lot more out of a natural language for you, whereas if it's just captioned, you miss so much, unless you add in parentheses, tone of voice is angry, or suspicious music, as often happens in movies and TV shows, or heavy breathing, or footsteps down the hall. Some movies do a great job with that, some don't, but it's a huge difference in what you access. And Some people think when they watch movies with me, they go, oh, this is so scary. And I'm like, it's not that scary. And it's all about like the lead up and the suspenseful music. And unless the captions are really well done, I don't get the same thing. Like Disneyland rides are another great example. They hear screams in the haunted house and I'm going like, this is fine. I think it's a cool decor and there's thunder and lightning, but we all access the world in different ways. And here, what we get from captions is 2D, whereas if you have interpreters, it's a 3D experience. And also people, they don't even understand that captions are this limiting. So I can't blame everybody. They think captions will fix everything, and they really don't. So get that message out, please.
I want to talk about the deaf community in Anchorage. I assume you found it, when you got here. And I guess, how big is our deaf community and how tight-knit is it compared to other places?
I think that our community is much more welcoming of different kinds of people. We include interpreters, we include the UAA ASL program and club, and people who want to learn sign language. We're much more open compared to some places in the lower 48. I think those places can be a little more reserved, a little more insular, and we want to support hearing parents with deaf kids very much. So we will invite them to our community events in a way that sometimes doesn't happen in other states. Now, speaking about the signing community, I don't speak for hard of hearing people. I don't even speak for all of the deaf community, but the signing community is fairly small. I would say we're like 150 people maybe in the state. 45 to 50 of them are consistent community members who we see all the time, and the rest live a little more remote or they prefer their own private life. Some people don't want to be involved in the deaf community. They're deaf, they sign, but they focus on their family, their own life, and that's totally fine. It is a personal choice. But the friend group can get really mixed because you have hearing friends who sign, you have deaf friends, and in the lower 48, I just had my deaf group of friends. And I didn't really hang out with hearing people ever. I didn't have exposure to them. I remember when I first moved here, I had a deaf friend invite me to a party. And I thought, is it a hearing party? I don't know that I can go. I don't want to go. I don't know who these people are. And my friend assured me that it will be fine. And they told me to come anyway. And it was a shocking, kind of scary experience to be around this new culture. And now I'm totally comfortable. I'm hanging out with people in the halls of the Capitol and bringing my interpreter, and everything is all good. But it was a learning curve.
What do you think is the biggest misconception that hearing people have about deaf people?
I get this a lot in Alaska, especially people outside of Anchorage. They call us mute. Oh, she's mute, or she's deaf and dumb, or deaf and mute. And that label is highly offensive, especially to the signing community. It's very outdated. It's very old. So deafness does not mean that you are mute. It means we sign. It means we can read and write English. It means but we laugh and we yell. And some deaf people do use their voices. They are trained in an oral way. So we avoid deaf and dumb, deaf mute, or just mute, because mutism is a thing, but it is not typically what we would consider part of our community.
Did you make a conscious choice to not learn to use your voice?
That's a hard question. It's a good question. I grew up with speech therapy. I did have speech therapy when I was a child, and my family, again, I would say compared to the rest of my family, I'm more hard of hearing. I'm culturally deaf, but I can hear a little bit, but I just wasn't interested in talking and speaking to people. My environment, again, was so language rich. I had the utopia experience for a deaf person. I like to listen to music. I like to listen to where sounds are coming from, but I don't know. I read the lyrics of music and I would listen to things and be able to sign songs with my friends, but I never had an interest in speaking. If I drive now and I know the lyrics to a song, I'll kind of sign along and maybe hum, but I just never had an interest in learning to speak. And I stopped speech therapy in middle school because speech therapy was a pullout and it took away from my academic time. So many elementary school and middle school kids lose academic time because they're in speech therapy. And I didn't have the rigor for it. I didn't want it to feel like a punishment, and it did. So it's a really good question.
So I was afraid to ask about Moulin Rouge and the music thing. I didn't want to ask a bad question. But when you say you hear music, I mean, you have some hearing.
Yes, I do. So there's a misconception out there that deaf people are 100% deaf in both ears, like means you can't hear anything. It's not true. There's different levels for different people. So in my right ear, it's my very deaf ear. So I'm at an 80 decibel loss, as you would read on an audiogram. But in my left ear, I'm like 65 decibels. So if I do use my hearing aids, I have them. I never use them. I can hear some things, but it's far too distracting. I never really was trained or practiced filtering out the noise. So when I wear my hearing aids, it's so distracting. So I really don't wear them. My left ear is the ear that I listen to music in, but only with a hearing aid, really.
And so did you wear hearing aids when you went to Moulin Rouge?
No, I didn't. It was loud enough. Broadway is loud. I don't know if you've been, but I can't imagine it with a hearing aid on. It would have been wild. Some friends, well, let me say this. Earlier today, I went to lunch with Jeff Landfield, the Alaska Landmine guy. He sponsored one of my pageant ads, so I thought, I owe him lunch. Let's get together. And he speaks loud no matter where he is. He is a chatterbox, and it's not a bad thing. But I asked the interpreters, like, is he speaking loud? Like, he knows I'm deaf. He doesn't have to yell at me, but it's just who he is. He speaks loud. So those sorts of tones I can hear a little bit of. And it actually, some people think they're going to help me by speaking louder. It does not help at all, but it's just who he is. So he wasn't trying to do me any favors. It's just, I can see when people are speaking quiet or loud for the most part. And I don't understand him fully. I couldn't just look at him and lip read him, but he's definitely loud enough to know that he's talking.
So my father's mother was very hard of hearing, definitely never part of any sort of hard of hearing community.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say our whole family spoke to her very loudly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just because it was like a politeness thing for her. So even as a small child, we always had to speak loudly for grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I have this instinct sometimes when I'm around deaf and hard of hearing people to just talk louder because I'm thinking about my grandmother and that's what we were supposed to do. But I also don't want to be rude. Like, they're like, why are they yelling at me?
No, it's not. I wouldn't say it's considered rude. I have a question for you. I would follow up to that, actually. Does she wear, or did she wear hearing aids? Okay.
She wore hearing aids.
So technology has changed quite a lot. Hearing aids are better now. They're smaller. They have different processors. They're much more powerful than before. So back in the day, you probably would have to speak up. I can't speak for old technology. I don't know, but things were different back then, for sure. And I mean, I would say if you encounter somebody like Representative Jamie Allard is hard of hearing. That is one of the reasons she's sponsoring our bill. She typically does not ask people to speak louder, but she benefits from, and she's very diligent about, looking at people's lips. So for her, that is her accommodation. She needs to be able to read your lips and catch what you're saying. That's different from what I need. It's a cool experience to work with her because I'm learning a lot from her kind of deafness or her kind of being hard of hearing. She is late deafened. She has a acquired hearing loss from serving our country. And so some people, if they don't sign, they're not going to need the same thing that I do. So she really actually looks at my interpreter's lips and she says, Clara, I'm not trying to be rude, but I'm just trying to read lips. So the interpreters are set up very differently when we work between myself and Jamie Allard. She likes to be closer to people on the phone. She likes to control the volume a little bit more. And she even told me that some days she's really tired of listening and her brain is just exhausted and she takes off her hearing aids too to just have some quiet. So it's a really good experience for me to get to work with people like that. Because again, it emphasizes the fact that it's a spectrum. Hearing loss is a spectrum and we're not all the same.
Hey, that's the perfect pivot. So Representative Jamie Allard has a bill. Can you explain what the bill does?
Yes, indeed. I'm so excited about this bill. The bill passed the House 40-0 with no opposition just this last Monday. So now we're working on the Senate side. It's SB 08 is the Senate bill number, and Senator Elvie Gray Jackson is the one who has sponsored the Senate side of that. The bill essentially, at its core, gives parents a full range, a menu of options for language modalities without bias. So it just lets them know what is available to them. It holds people accountable to provide that information. ASL is not the only choice. There's spoken English, there's total communication, there's a lot of different ways to teach a child. And often we get stuck, we hear from both sides of our two sides. We say, well, it's a parent choice state for education and this. Why can't we have parent choice for our deaf and hard of hearing kids? Because what we're hearing is parents aren't getting the full range of options. They don't know that we exist. How can you make a choice if you don't know that the choice exists? Is that really a choice? So this just holds school districts accountable to tell parents through their professionals what the options are. And then the parents get to navigate that system and know what is out there. We want to empower parents and empower families as that parent choice state. The first deaf person that parents often meet is their own child. It's a low incidence disability to be deaf or hard of hearing. It doesn't happen that often. And so parents have this beautiful baby and they go, my kid can't hear. And then their world falls apart. And sometimes I do wonder, if I became blind one day, I can't imagine what my life would look like. Or if someone was born blind, they know what they're doing. They've got the resources. But to me, because I'm not blind, it'd be a shock. So if you're a hearing parent and your baby's born deaf, it's scary, it's overwhelming. They're missing something to you. So all this bill does, it gives parents access to the options that they have. And those options can change depending on how your child acquires language. You can start with spoken English and go over to ASL, do both at the same time, none at all, whatever you want. Knowledge is power, and that's what this bill just tries to provide for Alaskans.
You just spoke about the first deaf person that some folks meet is their own child. Mm-hmm. How does that process work?
I think the best thing that we have, and it's one of the best things we have in the state, is the early hearing screening detection program. So if a child is born in a hospital, they do a hearing screening. And if they, quote unquote, fail, I hate that word fail, but if the child fails that hearing screening, we refer them to audiology, and parents then...
As a newborn
baby, yes. You can do it right after birth. Your child is born, you find out they're deaf, and you are referred for more intensive testing. So the infant usually is asleep, is the gold standard anyway, is the baby is asleep, because sometimes you have false failures or false positives, false negatives, whatever it is. So if the baby is asleep and they fail the test, they have to do the test again. And if they fail several more times, then it is denoted that they have a hearing loss. They're referred on to usually audiology, a medical option, and they explain how much hearing loss the child has. They do more screenings and tests. They often will say your options are cochlear implants and hearing aids. However, that is a medical model, and they are medical professionals. They don't have hearing. I mean, maybe they have hearing loss themselves. I can't speak for everybody. But for the most part, they are professionals trained in a medical model, and they don't have the cultural side of things. They don't know necessarily what we know, and I don't know what they know. The infant learning program that we have in Anchorage, our version is called PIC, Parents, Infants, and Children Program. That's our ILT provider. And we are so very lucky to have folks who work there who do know about sign language. One of them graduated from Gallaudet University. They have a background in a little bit of deaf education. They're respectful to the deaf community. So they refer parents to all of the options. They introduce parents to other parents, and it's amazing work that they're doing without bias. They don't say one is better than the other. They just say, here you go. Here is what you can have. And they support parents no matter what they choose. If they choose spoken English only or ASL only or both, it doesn't matter. Sometimes families meet me through other parents, and we're a pretty interwoven community. It takes a village to raise a child. And sometimes parents meet me and they don't even know that we exist. And so it's nice to finally be connected with them, but it takes longer than it should.
So last question, and it's kind of a controversial one, but I'll preface it by saying that I grew up in a conservative family in a small town in Texas, very religious family, where I didn't want to be gay. But I reached a point in my life fairly early on where if somebody had given me a pill to make me straight, I would never have taken that. I would not take that pill. I'm happy with the way I am. There's nothing wrong with the way I am. I would not take the pill. I'm curious, if somebody offered you a pill to be able to hear well, would you take the pill?
So this is so funny that you asked this, because part of my Ferrandi pageant is competition, and I've never competed in a pageant before. Let me say that. We had to do a lot of paperwork. We did an essay. We had to write a cover letter. My cover letter said exactly this, what you're asking right now. I used the matrix reference. So, red pill, blue pill, which would you take? I said, if one of these pills made me hearing and one of these kept me deaf, I would take the pill that kept me deaf. I don't want to hear it because it's not who I am. And I am so unapologetically deaf. And I can't imagine who I would even be if I wasn't deaf. No offense to hearing people, but I don't think that I would be as exciting as I am. I'd be boring. I'd live a normal life. I would work at Target or whatever. Nothing against people who work at Target, but I just would not have the dynamic life that I have. I have a fire and a passion for advocacy, and that's why I'm here in the Capitol. And would I have that if I was hearing? Would I be an advocate? Would I enjoy this kind of work? Would I get to meet all the legislators that I have met and the wonderful staff and the learning experiences that I've had? Like, the world is not built for people like me, but I'm going to figure out a way to navigate that and build it to suit me and so that others can follow behind and have access. So I would not take the pill that makes me hearing. No, thank you.
Oh, I do have one more question. So for me, I didn't know a lot of deaf people throughout my life. I just haven't met that many deaf people. But I did watch Children of a Lesser God when I was young with Mari Matlin and winning the Academy Award. And I'm just curious about her contribution to the community and what she means.
I don't know Marlee Matlin personally, but I feel like Hollywood is just such a different game that I want to make sure that I tread carefully with this. Marlee Matlin has given us more visibility. That is the number one thing I appreciate about her. But there's parts of the community that think, oh, Marlee Matlin has an advantage and some privilege because she can speak. There's some people that think like, hey, she's not maybe deaf enough, or she uses her voice to her advantage, or to maintain her, roles that she's getting, whatever it may be. There's a lot of critique. Like, people say she's not fighting hard enough. I don't know. But then there's another side that says, like, she's in it to win it. She's a business. She has given deaf people visibility no matter who she is, and it's great. So I think the deaf community, we are so small, and the access to information is so limited that we have to filter through. Like, let me give you an example. I can't listen to the radio. So many people learn so much from the radio. But Marlee Matlin has used her platform to give us access to information in other ways, and captioning on the TV and et cetera. So Marlee Matlin, I would say, does a lot of advocacy work for Deaf Hope. It's a domestic violence organization, so people who are experiencing abuse in their home. She has supported them so very much, and they are just the best. They're wonderful. And again, it's a little tough to explain. I think she's in the Hollywood game, and she's really making strides. For me, from a community perspective, I always want to see, can you cut more trail for the people who come behind you? And I'm not in Hollywood. I don't know if Marlee Matlin does that or not. I can't really speak to it, but she did give us so much visibility, and that's a win in my book. It's a big W.
If people want to learn ASL in Alaska, how can they go about doing that?
Excellent question. There's several different ways. I will tell you the two main ones, though. If you're in the Anchorage locality, come to Family Sign Night. It's every Tuesday night at Rush and Jack during the school year from 5:15 to 6:45. It's a free class. It's community-based, and they have beginner level, intermediate, and then kids class. I teach the kids class because I need a break from adults, so we have that available. We stop in April, I believe. If you look at our Alaska State School for the Deaf Facebook page, there's more details there. But the second best way, someone like yourself, there is an app. It's called the ASL app. It's made by deaf people who have a linguistic background, and it's the best of the best as far as remote teaching of American Sign Language goes. So I would also say learn from a deaf person. Hearing people, even if they're very good, it's embarrassing. There are people, even with the best of intentions, they're teaching wrong signs, inappropriate signs. They're also removing jobs from the ecosystem for deaf people. So we ask that you learn from deaf people when you're learning sign language.
Thanks. Clara Baldwin, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email rep.andrew.gray@akmleg.gov or call 907-465-4940.